Hi, and welcome to another edition of Jules Voto's Photo Focus. In today's video, we're going to be going over the features, controls, and how to use the Nikon FM. It was Nikon's first compact camera. It was introduced in 1977, and it was introduced with several other cameras when Nikon went to the auto indexing system to couple the lens to the meter. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start on the top right of the camera as you hold it. And on the right here, we have the film advance lever. Now it has a 30-degree standoff position, and you will note the red dot when you pull it out to that 30-degree position, and that turns the meter on. It also unlocks the shutter release. When the advance lever is fully pushed in, the shutter release is locked. You have to pull it out to that standoff position in order to release the shutter release. The early FMs, and I'm not sure how many were made that way, but the early ones had a lock around the collar of the shutter release. You could turn it to a lock position. Okay, so it's a single stroke lever. Just one full stroke, and it advances the film, cocks the shutter, and advances the frame counter. Okay, to the left of that we have the shutter speed dial, conventional shutter speed dial. Speeds go from B, from bulb, and on bulb, when you press the shutter release, the shutter opens. When you release the shutter release, the shutter closes. Use that for time exposures, preferably with the cable release, and we'll get to cable release in a minute. Okay, you also have speeds, so you have speeds from B to 1 to 1,000th of a second. You will see when we get to 1/125th of a second, it's in red. That is your flash sync speed for electronic flash. Okay, and again, it goes all the way up to 1,000th of a second. It doesn't turn 360 degrees, so when you get to 1,000, now you want to go to 1/8, you just have to go back. And now we're at 1/8 of a second. You will note this little switch here. What that does by pushing it towards the prism and advancing, using the advance lever, it allows you to take double exposures. So when pushing this in and advancing, you're not actually advancing the film, you were just cocking the shutter. The frame counter, you will note it's on 4 now. It doesn't move, and you could take multiple exposures using that control. Okay, one other thing with the shutter speed dial, you will notice this little window here. By pulling up on the ring around the shutter speed dial and turning it, we could set our ISO. Okay, and ISO goes up to 3200 and down to, got to make sure you leave that, pull that ring up and keep it up as you turn, or else you're going to turn the shutter speed dial. And it goes from 12, from ISO of 12 up to 3200. But we're just going to leave it set to 400 now. Here is your shutter release. It is threaded for a standard cable release. Okay, female thread on the shutter release for a standard cable release, which you screw in here. Or you could use Nikon's excellent AR2 cable release, and this screws into the male threads at the bottom of the shutter release, and it's very secure. Now, getting back to if your shutter speed is on B, okay, as I said before, you press the shutter release, the shutter opens, okay, you release the shutter release, and it closes. So in order to make time exposures, what you do is you need a locking cable release, and most cable releases are locking. So you advance the film, cock the shutter, press the cable release, and on this particular AR2 it has a little locking device here. Once you have timed your exposure, however long you may want it to be, you just press this little thing here and that unlocks the cable release and the shutter closes. Also, this camera will also accept Nikon's AR1 soft shutter release. These are very desirable. They're hard to find. When you do find them, they're usually around $30. I don't remember what they sold for back in the 60s. These were one of the original accessories for the Nikon F. They also fit the F2 and the Nikromats from back in the day. So it's really nice. It gives you a nice, smooth, raises the shutter release button, and it gives you a nice, smooth release. Now let's set this back to a higher speed. Okay, so remember, with this red dot exposed, the meter is on, and it stays on as long as that red dot is exposed. It also allows you to release the shutter, but when it's pushed in, the shutter release is locked. And we have our frame counter here, which resets when we open the back. So let's get this off. But you know what, why don't we get to the front of the camera? All right, on the front here, we have our self timer. It could be set from anywhere from about 2 seconds to 10. Okay, in order to use it, make sure your shutter is cocked. And of course, the advanced lever is pulled out. And then you just press the shutter release, and the shutter will fire. Now, let's suppose you want to use it, and then you decide not to. You decide, oh, I'm not going to use the self-timer. What do? Well, you could just push it back, and it'll count down without releasing the shutter. Now, one other thing related to the self-timer, this camera does not have a mirror lockup, which means you cannot mount some of the older lenses that require the mirror to be locked up, because the lens would mount right into the mirror box. So you couldn't mount with the mirror down because you would destroy the mirror. That includes some of Nikon's fisheye lenses, as well as the 21mm f4 lens for the original Nikon F. So you cannot mount those lenses. However, the other use of a mirror lockup is to minimize vibration when you have the camera on a tripod and you were using slow shutter speeds, a second, half second, whatever. So what happens when you use the self-timer? Let's see if we could illustrate this. I'm going to set like a 1/4 second shutter speed. Okay, set the self-timer. When you press the shutter release, the mirror actually flips up and stays up, and the aperture stops down to the set aperture until the camera fires. And then the mirror drops down, and the aperture, of course, opens back up to full aperture. So that's a great way to minimize vibration when using the camera on a tripod. Also, we have on the front here, we have one more thing. We have our depth of field preview button. Just press it in. Okay, right here, I'm going to see if I could show you that a little better. You just press down on it, and the lens stops down to the aperture which you set. We'll come back to that in a minute because there's another use for that as well. Okay, and then on the other side of the camera body, to the left of the lens mount as you hold it, we have the lens release. So you just press it down, turn the lens to the right to remove it. And then you'll notice on the silver ring on this lens, a little black dot lines up with the black dot on the camera, and we have mounted the lens. Okay, one other thing on this side is our connection for flash, for a studio type flash or a flash that doesn't have a hot shoe. We have our PC connection here. Now, the nice thing with this, and this was changed, I guess, back when they introduced the F2 in '71, it is threaded, okay? And just a regular PC cord just plugs straight in, right? problem with that is it can easily come out. It just comes, it could get caught on something and pull out. With the threaded connection here, I'm not going to fully put this in, but you just attach it and screw it in, and then it doesn't pull out easily. Okay. Let's put this little cover back on here. And this, of course, screws in as well. Now, before we get to the other side of the camera, I just want to talk a little bit about the lens mount. This is a standard Nikon F lens mount introduced in 1959 with the Nikon F. This camera is designed to take AI lenses. Now, I have a video that talks about pre-AI, AI, AIS lenses, and but this camera was designed for AI lenses. You can tell an AI lens, one of the easiest ways to tell is that it has this second set of aperture numbers. Okay? The AI stands for automatic indexing. But this camera can also use non-AI lenses or pre-AI lenses. However, in order to do that, you must move this AI indexing tab out of the way. And there's a little tiny button here. And you just push it up. Okay, see how it is now in this position? It's up. And then you can mount a pre-AI or non-AI lens. And the reason you have to push this tab up, if you try to mount a non-AI lens, you would damage that tab and you'd have to send the camera in for repair. So we can now mount non-AI lens. This is an older 28mm 3.5 lens. However, when you do that, you must use stop-down metering. How do you use stop-down metering? All right, you just turn the meter on by, again, uncovering that red dot, and you just press in this depth of field preview button when you take your meter reading. Set your exposure, you can release it, and then take your picture. Okay, so this camera will use non-AI lenses. Also, the Nikon FE that came out a year later will do that, but most of the cameras after that, other than the top-of-the-line Pro models, you would not be able to mount non-AI lenses. So it's a nice feature of the Nikon FM. Okay, so after removing the non-AI lens, we just have to remember before mounting our AI lens to push that tab back down. And now we could mount. You could mount the AI with that tab up, but it's not going to couple to the meter. Okay, so now we're just going to mount the lens. All right. Okay, so now on the top of the camera, on the top left, we have our rewind knob. Okay, we just unfold it to rewind film. Also, by pulling up on that rewind knob, we can open the back of the camera. There's a little lock here. We just press it back towards the back of the camera, and now the back flips open. We're going to get to loading film in a second. So let me just close this right now. You will notice the eyepiece. It is a rubber eyepiece. This is the same eyepiece that is still for sale, and it will fit all of the FM and FE series cameras, the FA. It'll even fit the photomic finders for the Nikon F2, the Nikromats, the Nikon EL, and it's still available. Sells for around $24 or $25. And I put these on all my older Nikon manual focus cameras, my F2s. It will not fit on the standard eye-level prism for the Nikon F, but it's really nice. If you wear glasses, it won't scratch them. Now, about the viewfinder, this is not a high eye point viewfinder like some of Nikon's newer cameras, like the F3 has, or the more recent digital cameras. However, if you wear eyeglasses, kind of move your eye around a little bit to see the entire screen. People who don't wear eyeglasses, no problem, you'll be able to see the entire screen. Here is a film box reminder. You just put the end of the film box in there so you know what type of film you have in the camera. Okay, let's look at the bottom of the camera, and then we're going to go to the inside and I'm going to show you how to load film. All right, we have connections. This camera will take an MD11 or MD12 motor drive. There's some connections here and here and here for that. Here is your standard tripod socket and your film rewind button. Need to push that button in when it's time to rewind film. Now this camera takes two S76 batteries, or they are 1.5 volts each, or you can put in a 3-volt lithium or alkaline battery. All right, and there's your battery. Let's put this baby back in. Okay, so a little bit about the meter on this camera before we show you how to load film. The meter on this camera uses two gallium photodiodes to give you center weighted metering, concentrating 60% of its sensitivity in the 12 millimeter central area of the viewfinder. You will see that indicated by a 12 millimeter circle etched in the focusing screen. And it's very sensitive, but I believe this was the only Nikon camera that used that photodiode. The Nikon FE and most later cameras use silicon blue cells. And not sure the reason why. I believe it had to do with cost. This gallium photodiodes were more expensive apparently than silicon blue. This camera did not use a needle, which on a lot of cameras that had to be centered in order to set proper exposure. The FM, like the Nikon F2AS, used a series of LED lights. If just the center light was on, proper exposure was set. If the top LED was just lit by itself, then you were overexposing by more than one stop. If the top and center lights were both on, then you were overexposed by 1/5 to 1 stop. If the center and bottom lights were lit, then you were underexposing by 1/5 to 1 stop. And if just the bottom LED was lit, you were underexposing by more than 1 stop. What's nice with that was it was very easy to see even in low light conditions. You also had at the top of the viewfinder your aperture readout, and on the left side the set shutter speed. Now the way the camera indicated to you the aperture set, it used what's Nikon called the ADR readout, and that was what that second set of aperture numbers was towards the back of the lens mount. Okay, there was an optical system in the prism that magnified that and showed it to you in the viewfinder. The older non-AI lenses did not have that, and therefore when using one of those older lenses with stop-down metering, you would not see the aperture in the top end of the viewfinder. You also have a standard hot shoe. Okay, also on the top, I think I forgot to mention, that is your focal plane. For certain types of macro work, you may need to know exactly where the focal plane is, and that is indicated right here. Okay, so let's show you how to load film. And this is a good roll. It's old and it's been stored in the freezer, but may still be good. So I'm going to Set my shutter speed high, my aperture small. All right, so we're going to open up the back of the camera by pressing this towards the back and pulling up on the rewind knob. The camera opens. One quick thing. Let me just close that back up for a second. If you're about to put a roll of film in the camera, especially if you haven't used the camera for a while, you want to make sure there's not a roll of film in there. Okay? An easy way to tell is to unfold your rewind crank and just turn it in the direction of the arrow. If it turns very freely, no resistance at all, there's no film in the camera. Okay, so now let's open that back. So we're going to pull back on this, push back on this, and pull up the rewind. A good thing to do so you know what type of film is in the camera is to tear off the end of the film box and just slide it in here, all right? And then you know not only that the camera's loaded, but what type of film is inside. Now have the rewind knob pushed up. We're going to drop the roll in, push the rewind knob back down. I'm going to bring the film over. It's a multi-slotted take-up spool. Okay, let's just center this up a little better for you here. It's a multi-slotted take-up spool. You're just going to find one of the slots and push that film in. Okay, now we're going to advance. Okay, you can see it catch. And you also want to make sure top and bottom that the sprocket holes on the film line up with the sprocket in the camera. Okay? We're now going to close the back, turn the camera back over, and what I do is unfold the rewind crank. Okay, so now we're going to make a couple blanks, right? Now I want you to notice the rewind knob. See how it's turning as we advance film? That means the film is properly loaded, that it caught up on the take-up spool. So you're going to make a couple blanks, and now we're ready for frame one. Okay, so now we shot a whole bunch of great pictures. Oh, one other thing, very important. Make sure you set your ISO. Now I have it set to 400. This is 100 speed film, but always make sure you set that. In fact, I think it's probably a good idea to set that right before you put the film into the camera so you don't forget. All right, so you're going to lift up on the ring around the shutter speed dial and set your ISO. All right, so now we shot some great pictures. It's time to rewind. I'm going to press in the rewind button, unfold the rewind crank, and turn. Now you've got resistance. All right, now I don't want this to go in completely. So as soon as you hear a little kind of a click, that means the film has pulled off the take-up spool. Now we could open the back. Okay, and there we go. Now normally you would rewind this completely back in, but like I said, this is a good roll, which it's old, but I may or may not use it someday. So I'm just going to put this back. Let me just say a little something about the focusing screen. It is non-interchangeable. The standard screen on the Nikon FM is the case screen. And the Nikon case screen was also the standard screen on the Nikon F2 and many other Nikon cameras, starting with the F2. It has a central split image rangefinder and also a microprism donut surrounding that rangefinder. So it's a very useful screen for all types of photography, great with wide angle lenses, normal lenses. With longer telephoto lenses, that center rangefinder could black out, one half of it could black out, so we use the surrounding area for focusing screen. One of my favorite things about this camera is it's fully mechanical and the battery is only required for the meter. All your shutter speeds, everything works without a battery. So just to show you the size difference, here is a Nikon F2AS compared to a Nikon FM, and it's much smaller and much lighter. You could easily find these cameras on the used market for under $100. They are very reliable and durable. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I come out with a new video every Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So thanks for watching, and I will talk to you next time.